are live. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you all keeping today? How are we all doing tonight?
Doing well, doing well.
Mm.
It's not raining now.
Oh, it's not
So it's
raining for a
good.
change.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, we had mad winds up here in the north yesterday.
Mm.
Yes.
So, but it's although saying to someone who lives in Okinawa about complaining about the windy weather and the rain might be a bit, it's not as bad as what you can get in monsoon season.
It's funny because it's never like even I sound like a lunatic of an Irishman, but I was very disappointed with typhoons. And the reason why I'm so disappointed with typhoons is it just doesn't have the bite in it. Do you know how like when you've got cold, windy rain in Ireland, you can feel the rain banging off your
Yeah.
cheeks. It's cold, it's everything. Typhoons, there's just I kind of went out there and I was expecting something that the wind wise to actually hit me, and I live on an island as well, so when people are like, oh, it's very very bad out here, it's very terrifying, I was expecting more of a hit with the wind and the rain and stuff, so I was sitting there very disappointed. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be like running around half naked in a typhoon or anything because of the danger of being hit by something. But at the same time, I was kind of disappointed, especially the first year I was here, about the lack of a punch to a typhoon. But it is what it is. I say that now, and I probably jinx myself.
Yeah.
Later on.
The difference is you have typhoon season. We're in Ireland. I'm on the southwest coast.
Mm.
We have wind all year round.
Yeah, like that's what I felt like when typhoon season came here. I felt like, well, this is every day in Ireland,
Yeah.
in Okinawa. Most of the time you have seasons where it's just completely perfect, it's heaven on earth. Now don't get me wrong, there's a lot of rain coming in right now, and there was a very bad typhoon over in the Philippines which brought in what was it, a mini tsunami into the area as well, which was very very bad, very terrifying as well. So yeah, it's funny, like, from my Irish interpretation. All right. So then, how are we keeping this morning?
Hi, Dennis.
Is Dennis in? Is he?
Yeah.
Happy days.
And someone's asking you to do a series on the origins of Irish surnames from clans and families, especially in Munster.
Oh yeah, we were doing that for what was it, next week? Were you asking last week as well about that one? Because I think I've got booked in for next week. We are covering the same time again, unless you guys want to go earlier or something. But yeah, booked in for the same time next week. We are covering. Let me just check the title there that I put in.
Late Munster history or something. I think.
Yeah, so somebody asked about it last
Yeah.
week. I don't know if that's the same person asking for that one, but yeah, we have late medieval Gaelic Munster posted in. So yeah, we could cover surnames and clans. Michal would be more than happy to cover surnames and clans.
Yeah, and Owen, me and Owen, or Owen and I, have great overlap in our sort of interests in families such as the Sullivans, the McCarthys. If you have any interest in what I'd say is that I give a general history overall, but Owen's very good for filling in the gaps where I would sort of miss over because time constraints, or it's not intuitive for the narrative that I'm sort of the story I'm because I do it canonically. Is that what you do it like through the years? So Owen's, I would recommend watching my Sullivan video and then going to Owen's channel to get context for certain centuries.
Oh,
Hi, Kira. It's raining in Mayo.
It's very bad at Mayo, is it? I'm all being fancy with my cup this morning, my coffee.
Raining in the west by.
Any recommendations? Our channel. Jesus, you're literally looking at them. And I suppose we'll start this morning. What's this comment here? So putting hands in pockets is rising against the British. It can be at times. If you've ever been to England and you've ever been to some, myself and Michal have been to a few stuff. All right, we're putting your hands in pockets was definitely a protest against the British. What was it called? Now then. Yeah, I suppose we'll start off. So the whole conversation on who are the Anglo-Irish, and before we came on, it was Owen O'Neill was saying this morning, definitely make sure to highlight the word medieval, because I was saying to him about the fact that anytime we bring up the conversation on the Anglo-Irish, people are very quick to suddenly start talking about 1916 or modern Anglo-Irish in Manchester, Liverpool, and London. And I just want to highlight that we're not talking about 1916 today and modern Anglo-Irish of today. Just to highlight that for sure, that this is a topic that we're not covering today, and that we're mostly trying to focus on the Anglo-Irish of the medieval era. So just to get that out of the way. Specifically, I want to kind of define the word Anglo-Irish of the 15th century, the 15th, 16th century. Is when I'm using the term Anglo-Irish, I'm mostly talking about the 15th, 16th century, which is the era of the late 100 Years' War, the Wars of the Roses, and then going into the Tudor conquest of Ireland. And it's mostly covering the foundation of, how we say, the Normans in Ireland that came over around 1169 to 1172. At the same time, I know the comment section is going to come in here and correct me about the term Norman as well, because, what was it, last year and this year, it's been definitely a thing of debate. Should we still be using the term Norman in 2025, especially when we have two books that came out last year, which is the Medieval Irish Kings and the English Invasion, which questions the term Norman. And I suppose rightly so in many ways, because at the time of around the 12th and 13th century, as we're calling them today, Normans didn't refer to themselves as the Normans. The first wave that came in around 1169 referred to themselves as the Knights of the Welsh Marches. And then the second wave that came in around 1172 defined themselves as, Henry II's Knights. So the term Norman, the way we use it today, is a modern interpretation in many ways. There are many members who invaded around 1169 and 1172 that did have ancestors, their grandfathers and so on and so forth. And also they had cousins and other uncles and family members who were from Normandy. So they still, around 12th and 13th century, many of these people did have connections going back to Normandy, which Sean Duffy and many others do discuss about. So it is, from the get-go, I am aware that people are, when they're talking about the foundation about these people, they are using the term Norman. But today, when I say the term Anglo-Irish, I am talking about the 15th to 16th century. And at the same time, I am recognizing that people are debating and arguing about the term Norman when talking about the 12th and 13th century. Pretty much covers it, lads, isn't it? My opening statement in many ways. Michal, you look like you want to say something there.
No, I agree. It's not, it's not a neat label, so, it's something that needs clarified just at the start, because of just how, it's a topic that covers century-long invasion, settlement, mixing, resistance, reinvention, and, so it's, people just need to get that in their sort of minds before we continue. So you're right to just sort of clarify that. So no, I was just nodding away contently, just
happy days
thinking.
Right. And on top of that as well, just because we will be jumping around today, I noticed that last week people were struggling with these terms. And rightly so. If you're not from the island of Ireland, you wouldn't have grown up with many of these terms. So I do understand that people are tripping over them. The pronunciation of these, by the way, is if you look at the very north there in the green spot, you have Ulster. Then in yellow, we have Connacht. Then at the bottom there, we have Munster, Leinster, there in red. And also in the middle there in purple, we have Meath. Okay, so just to get the pronunciation, because I know a few people were complaining to me, all right, that when we suddenly ran over to Leinster, we did lose a lot of people there. So just to define that before we start racing off again about many of these definitions, especially to our American and Canadian audience tonight. Just to define there, in 1169, when we have the opening invasion from the Normans, they come into the Leinster region. So if we look back at this photo here, we have Leinster. This is the region that the Normans go into during the first wave of invasions, right? In particular, when we talk about the Butler family, they invade into what was at the time as the realm of Ulster. So when we talk about the Butlers, just be aware that this is the territory here that they invade into, with, as they are referred to at the time, and Michal is more than welcome to correct me if I get any of this wrong, the Gilpatrick originally in this area. And they're kind of the ones that end up, as we'll explain later on, kind of in that kind of Anglo-Irish world as well, kind of going in between. And they're from there when we do get the, later on then in around 1172, we get what modern historians refer to as the Anglo-Norman invasion in 1172. And they start to branch out from there, branching off to the likes of Ulster in the north, into the Meath area, and also over to Munster as well, and various other spots in Connacht, which we'll talk about in a bit, as these Normans, as we call it today, settle down into Ireland. Also, another thing I want to note as well is that when these Normans are penetrating into the island of Ireland, a lot of people have a interpretation that the Irish are savage, backwards, running around half naked in fur. And I just want to highlight that that's not, completely the case at all, to be quite honest with you. Here's a depiction of what the Normans look like in the 12th century. And if we look at the Lewis chess piece, which was going between Norway into Ireland at the time, it gives us an idea of the fashion at the period, which was the Hiberno-Scandinavian fashion of the 12th century, which gives us an idea that the Irish aren't entirely backwards. Like, if this is the way that people are dressing in the Isles, just off of Ireland, it gives us a really good idea that the Irish at the time are not ignorant to the dress and fashion of the 12th century, that they're not running around naked compared to their Norman counterpart. No, don't get me wrong. The reason why the Normans are so dominant is because of their cavalry charge. If you look at the military history and literature at the time, every single time a shield wall or spear wall comes up, the Normans are so quick to charge in and just smash up the lines, the flanks. And that, ultimately from a simple interpretation is why the Normans are so dominant at the time. But they're not dominant because the Irish are running around half naked against the superior Norman military force. However, at the same time, I am aware, if we look at Gerald of Wales's work and then compare it to the likes of the Book of Kells, and then we look into the literature of the likes of the Finn cycle and also cattle raiding in general, that we do have people that place, the likes of Riveted Mail and Gammonson to the side and go cattle raiding. So I am aware that we do have cattle raiders, Kearns and Uglock, who go out and cattle raid, and they're the ones that run around half naked and even go into skirmishes in battle, perhaps with, lacking the armor that the likes of the Cleary and Ridra, the King's War Band, and also the King's Knights would lack going into the battlefield. But if we look at the likes of Sean Duffy's evidence that he has analysed, looking at the likes of the Wallace collection and stuff in Dublin, we can see that there is plenty of riveted mail and also armor piercing arrows and weapons designed to fight riveted mail. So the armor of the period is fully, there inside of Ireland. So I just want to highlight that there isn't a huge jump technology-wise between the Gael and what's it called, the Irish. So at times there is a blur between both the world of the Gael and the world of the Normans at the time. And one family in particular, as I was highlighting there earlier, with the Uisreacha, you can see that's the territory of the Uisreacha there that we're talking about earlier. One family that goes into that blur of the Anglo-Irish world is definitely the Fitzpatrick. Micheál is definitely somebody who could definitely elaborate on to that family in particular, the way that they are from the get-go blurred between the world of the Gael and the English world. Definitely from the get-go. Is there anything, when it comes down to the discussion of the 12th and 13th century, is there anything else you'd like to add on to, Micheál, when it comes down to that?
No, but the McGillapatricks, the problem they have, which some families probably, like the O'Briens, who are able to push out Norman expansion relatively quickly and then solidify their sort of area. The declarers who held large territory there, sort of fragmented, and their lands were sort of not contested through the heiresses of the declarer states. But the problem the McGillapatricks, who later became the Fitzpatricks, is it's the butlers that sort of come into their area. And anyone who knows Butler history sees how dominant they were and remained through Irish history, especially in the northern parts of Uisreacha. So the McGillapatricks and their vassals, such as the Brennans, etc., were kind of forced to straddle these two worlds of Gaelic identity, Norman identity, very quickly because of just their location. You've got the Pale to their left, well, right, if you're looking down on the map. You've got the Butlers to their west. You've got the Fitzgerald, that's north and south. So they're quite central and from quite powerful Norman dynasties that, to retain any power, you have to sort of sit on that fence and play politics. Although the Fitzpatrick name doesn't actually come till the surrender of Regrant, the 16th century, sorry. But you can see very quickly that they are forced to sort of a lot of families. They're not the only one, and many would fail at this. Others would survive. We've got the O'Neills, we've got the McCarthys, we've got the O'Briens. So they're all these powerful families are just doing what they need to do to survive from this sort of onslaught of political, cultural, military dominance that's sort of happening very quickly until they're able to establish themselves as independent. So
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially with the lack of action from the likes of Rory O'Connor and stuff. Rory O'Connor I don't know if Owen O'Neill's going to correct me on this one, but the moment Strongbow arrives, what was it called? Rory O'Connor, the High King of Ireland at the time, the man with the biggest stick, he's kind of running around, not sure what he wants to do from my interpretation of the literature. And when Henry II rocks up, Henry II seems to be so central because he rocks up with a force of 4,000, and this isn't a force of like peasants or anything. It's a force of retinue, which is kind of like the special forces at the time. And especially the likes of the Uisreacha and the men of Meath, they're definitely fully in the line of sight of Henry II. So I don't blame, and with a force of 4,000 men, when they casually have a force of 120 Clí King's Warband, I don't blame the likes of who, by the way, like they don't have a form of nationalism at the time. It's all about your, as we would say from a modern interpretation, clan. It's all about your clan and looking after your family. That's where your loyalty belongs. of course they're going to be very quickly going, oh yeah, I submit to you, no problems. To be honest with you, I do the complete the very same. Even with nationalism, if somebody has a force of 4,000 men, what was it, just 20 miles from my home, I'd be very quick to surrender as well, especially when the government isn't willing to support me. And that's from a modern perspective, to be quite honest with you. Owen, is there anything you want to elaborate there? Or
Yeah, well, I'm not going to disagree with you, but just to argue on Rory O'Connor's behalf, I think he was unlucky and he didn't understand that the rules of the game were changing. Sort of so from the perspective, if we're Irish in 1172, 73, and we're discussing what's going on, our obvious references are the Norse invasions, if you like, which took place over a couple of hundred years. And what happened to the Norse? They get absorbed. And then Gaelic legends is all about absorbing people getting absorbed in Ireland. So then O'Connor is more unlucky in that one of the most centralized countries in Europe at the time is England.
yeah.
And you have like Henry II was very skilled, very able, but he had loads of problems. Like there's the war with his mother, etc., etc. But he wins it, so he's strong. He's jealous. He does not want his strongbow them developing an alternative kingdom. So he comes in. O'Connor just does what the Gaelic lords have always done, kind of roll with it, sort of fight when you can fight, and then postpone, not realizing that all of a sudden we have this new force and they're here to stay. And instead of Dublin being a source of wealth, which the North City had been for a couple of hundred years, all of a sudden it becomes the capital of this new kingdom. And I think no one in Gaelic Ireland realized that for quite a while. I wouldn't even, I can't offhand say when the penny dropped, but it took quite a while.
Okay, just heading back into the comment section. There was actually one second.
Wait, what? The TikTok comments aren't coming through on the group chat.
Oh, you managed to get TikTok up and going. Can you, if you can, what you could do is actually just copy and paste it into the private chat if they're not breaking through. Let me just have a look there. Oh, you do have TikTok up and running. Nice one. What's the viewership for TikTok? I just want to see if it's actually, it must be just broadcasting over and not, because I noticed that that's the same with Instagram as well, that it has problems bringing it over. It's mostly Facebook and YouTube seem to be the best for bringing comments and stuff over, to be honest with you.
There's 63 on TikTok at the minute.
Yeah, see, that's not, yeah. Actually, yeah, it explains here, actually, if I click over, TikTok and Instagram is actually blocking its viewership onto my multi-stream. Just so everyone's aware in the comment section, I actually paid for a multi-stream. I've been using your Patreon money to pay for the multi-stream. But what was it called? Yeah, I'm using multi-stream and it's not bringing the TikTok and Instagram comments over. So if I don't see your TikTok comments, I apologize for that. But what we'll do now is I'll have Michal and Owen, if you guys are using TikTok and Instagram, will you just keep an eye on that? And what you can do is copy and paste the comment over to the private chat, or even just read it out loud, and we can go through there, because your feedback, I'm looking at the comments, some of the comments here are absolutely brilliant to start off with, and I kind of want to continue that momentum from you guys. So don't hesitate to leave comments down below, because these comments are absolutely brilliant. Okay, at the same time, I could end up having conversations about a lot of this stuff all day, to be honest with you. Yeah, you guys are right, by the way. That's what I actually wanted to talk about next. As these Normans are invading, penetrating through, you're bang on right. They end up leaving a massive lineage into the island of Ireland. Especially around the Leinster region. So mostly for the main part of this, especially when we eventually get up to the 15th century, which I want to talk about today. And when I'm talking about the Anglo-Irish, I'm not talking about the Anglo-Irish of the 20th and 21st century. I mostly want to talk about the Anglo-Irish of the 100 Years' War, the Wars of the Roses in Ireland, and also the Tudor invasion of Ireland. So when I'm talking about Anglo-Irish, I'm talking about the medieval interpretation of the Anglo-Irish, not the modern interpretation of Anglo-Irish and Manchester and Liverpool and all that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about that so much today. So the main penetration that we have from the very start happens around the Leinster region. So we can see the majority of influences and culture of the Anglo-Irish culture mostly penetrating the Leinster area, especially around the likes of the kingdom of Ushraga and Waterford and stuff, where we can see even we naturally expect the likes of the Butlers to be very Anglo-Irish, between the world of the Gael and the English. But at the same time, as myself and Micheál were highlighting, is the fact that this isn't just the people of Norman descent that start to take on the whole Anglo-Irish identity. It's also Gael as well. You do have Gael, like Fitzpatrick's, for example, that are between the world of the English and the Gael when it goes on to the 15th century. Next, I just want to head over to what's it called? The 13th century. I just want to get deeper into it before we have a deeper discussion. This is a map here of what Ireland is like after we have all these initial invasions to Ireland. As you can see here, we still have Leinster and Meath, which is heavily under the control of the English of the period. Now, granted, these people are still of Norman descent, the majority of them, such as the Bergs, the Butlers, the Fitzgeralds, and they're mostly fixed around the Kilkenny area at the time. So we can see majority of that kind of influence later on of that kind of Anglo-Irish identity. But it needs to be noted as well that in the 13th century, many of these people did consider themselves English at the time and did see themselves as loyal to Henry III. Many historians point out that Henry III was sort of seen as a failed king, both in England and France. However, in the 13th century, he was very successful in Ireland to have that English identity, that these Norman knights did, to a certain degree, did define themselves as English knights in Ireland at the time of the 13th century. And they did have their armor, and the way they did dress was different to the Gael. Now, don't get me wrong, at the same time, those areas in the Leinster and Meath area are still of a blur. It's not completely black and white, but if we look at an English knight here, and then we look at the dress of the Gael at the time, especially the likes of the Gallo-glass effigies, etc., we can see differences, massive differences between the two, which can be further if you're looking at English knights at the time. We can see that in books and literature and stuff. And then if we look at the effigies that we can find in Iona and then scattered throughout, let me see if I can actually get a better view of that photo there. Geez, unless it comes out tiny. Oh, there we go. If we look at the effigies that we can find in Iona and also around, mostly fixed around the northwest of the island of Ireland, we can see many of these effigies of the Gael is far different to the effigies of the English of Ireland in the southeast of the island of Ireland. So even in the 13th century, there are differences between the Gael and the English of the period. If you guys want to have another look at the Celtic Templar over his channel has done videos on the way that the Gael have dressed at this period. But at the same time, I just want to also highlight that it's not completely black and white. This is a seal from the O'Connors, which depicts more of a kind of European style at the time. So to say that it's completely black and white isn't always the case, and that we can still find effigies that have more of a European style at the time. So, especially around regions of Connacht and areas that are blurred between the English world and the Gael world, it's not completely black and white at the time. We do have a blur between the two worlds. However, at the same time, just before I go up to the 13th century as well, do you guys have any feedback, or is there any questions coming in there? I can see one or two of them popping up before I push forward.
Just one point, Philip. Caveman says Ulster held against the Norman invasion apart from County Down, but the Normans went much further into Ulster. They reached Inishowen, and they reached parts of Derry, like sort of in their main strongholds was in Down, and Ards is in Antrim, isn't it? Because the Savage.
No, Ards is North Down. It's on the northern tip of the Ards Peninsula, so it's just south of, just on the map. You'd be Bangor at the top, Ards is on the bottom, at the mouth of the peninsula.
But Carrickfergus is Antrim.
Yeah,
Carrickfergus is North Antrim.
Yeah, because like that was one of the main castles in Norman castles in Ulster. So it was a bit more than Down.
Yeah, but you've also got to just with the Ulster sort of thing. So the Hanlons, who were from Armagh, which is the bordering county to County Down, and they held parts of County Down as well. They were another family that allied themselves very closely with the Normans. In fact, they're not recent, but in the last sort of 15 years, they found like a ring network of Mott and Bailey structures sort of along the O'Hanlon Norman lands, as it were. But then they find later ones a little bit more scattered through O'Hanlon territories. And this sort of coincides with how the O'Hanlons actually sort of leaned more towards using the Normans as allies and of fending off the Kenaloan and other Airchelan groups from the south. So again, this is another example of blurred lines where it's not clean cut, where we show a map of blue being the Normans, green being the Irish. But these maps are just a snapshot of a single moment in history, when actually every season those borders change, depending on marriage alliance, depending on everything that you would come to expect with shifting boundaries.
I have a very good example of those shifting boundaries. Everybody has heard of Henry Bagnall, who was killed at the Battle of the Yellow Ford. His father had fled England and come over, but a nephew of Henry Bagnall's was executed by the Cromwellians in Wexford, like in 1652 or something. He was fighting for the Confederacy. And then the song Kelly the Boy from Killaan about 1798. It refers to Bagnall Harvey. I think Bagnall Harvey was a descendant of the Bagnalls. And again, it's just blurring these lines that get moved all the time.
Yeah, but I also agree with the comment section. It's there. I know there's more comments and stuff coming over from TikTok there, and we'll get over back. Don't worry, we haven't abandoned you guys in TikTok. We have a very funny thing going on over there. But what was it called? I do agree with what's happening over on YouTube there, where people are saying that the English couldn't hold out in Ulster, especially like I fully agree with that one. Like I think especially when we have going from Brian O'Neill's revolt around 1260 up to around 1390, that the O'Neills rightly push the English out of it, and Carrickfergus ends up taking on this kind of siege mentality, where they hold out for almost forever against both the Scots and the Irish. So I definitely do fully agree with what the comment section has to say there. Michal, is there anything else you want to elaborate when it comes down to, the English in Ulster and stuff, or are we happy to push along into the comments?
No, sorry, I was typing that question into the thing. I didn't realize I hadn't muted my keyboard, so just smashing
no,
away.
it's grand.
We got used to that. Yeah, there's well, I suppose this could kind of tie into Blake's question from TikTok is in the private chat here. Is so at this point in 1200 to 1300, we can say the Irish are underarmed, undermanned compared to the English. I and Owen has sort of said in a way, and I kind of agree, which is why we start to see the response from the Irish with the the hiring of armed gallowglass from the Kingdom of the Isles, Scotland. I mean, these networks already existed because these families living along the Isles of Scotland were a mix of Hiberno, Norse, and Scottish families. With a multitude of paternal and maternal links to all three sort of societies. So, but they have realized that very quickly, well, not quickly, in the terms of history when you're reading through it through the centuries, but obviously at the time it's a generation or two. That they need a response to this Norman cavalry charge, these Norman tactics, these heavy Norman horse. The fact that the Norman cavalry, one of the unique things about the Norman cavalry is they are so organized, they are able to do multiple charges into an enemy line. They're able to hit the line, come back, reform, hit the line, come back, regroup, hit the line, which is basically unheard of. Well, it's unheard of in Irish military tactics, and probably in most of in most of the Isles of Britain and Ireland. So, with the exception of the odd soldier who's gone to serve in foreign armies.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I fully agree with you, Micheál, and I think it goes back to what Owen was saying earlier, that the O'Connors are just not wakey. Like, even when the invasion is happening, Rory O'Connor's just, he's not waking up. Even going as far as, from my, like, God, it frustrates me so much, Rory O'Connor's constant reaction, because I was even, my class over on Patreon, last week, was on the siege of Limerick, and even Rory O'Connor's response, holding the Treaty of Windsor and turning against the O'Briens in the siege, and I know the O'Connors and the O'Briens were rivals beforehand, and there is no form of nationalist identity, but God almighty, Rory, would you just keep on the side of the O'Briens and push the Normans and the English out of it already? Like, Christ, did you have to betray the O'Briens for the Normans?
Yeah. I think you're touching on an important point there. Like, it's too easy to talk about, the Norman penetration, the Normans were doing this against the Gaelic Irish, etc., etc. Whereas the Gaelic Irish were continuing their own political struggle. Like we mentioned, like the fights in Ulster in the 13th century. To Brian O'Neill, okay, he began to adopt some sort of patriotic call, but beforehand he was embroiled in a struggle, an internal Canon Owen struggle against the McLaughlins, and he won a big battle where a huge amount of McLaughlins gets wiped out. And then even in the Battle of Down, there were Gaelic Irish on both sides. Sort of, and you can find the same down in Munster, the Battle of Callan, which was a Gaelic success, the opposite of the Battle of Downpatrick. It was more or less the same year, which was very important for the McCarthys. It was part of a McCarthy civil war or internal conflict. So you have these dynamics, these succession dynamics of families or groups fighting against each other, and many of these people are trying to drag the Normans into their own successions, whereas the Normans are busy carving out their new lordships. And, it sort of, in a way, they were doing what the Gaelic lords had been doing, but because of their cavalry and their armor, their legitimacy, whenever they got granted land from London, they were able to carve out a new type of state.
Mm. And it's very, very funny inside of Ireland. Now, I'm not saying that the Normans were saints; they were fighting amongst themselves as well. Like you can see that from the get-go when you have the De Clares and the De Lacys, arguing from the get-go. But at the same time, there's still that kind of English identity between the Normans in the 13th century when fighting against the Gael, where the Gael just seem to be constantly, raging into their next dispute amongst themselves. But at the same time, it's funny that, you have somewhat of an English identity inside of Ireland. But at the same time, inside of England, they're going from one Barons' War to the next Barons' War to the next Barons' War. And it's the same thing in France as well, where, you have lords fighting lords, same thing over the Holy Roman Empire as well. So it's funny that through all of Europe, we're having all of these Baron Wars kicking off, which at times, most of the times, like most of these history books that I have in front of me, have this idea of a complete unified, centralized England. But inside of England, that's not entirely the case.
Yeah.
That they are the English inside of England are actually fighting amongst themselves. But it's so strange on the opposite side, inside of the island of Ireland, there's sort of this kind of, although at times they are having rivalship and fighting amongst themselves, there's still a level of unification there.
One difference between the Irish case and the English case. In Ireland, one of the unifying themes among the Anglo-Normans becoming the Anglo-Irish is law. The Normans are following English law, which whatever the name you want to give to it, common law, in which there is a legal succession, i.e., the eldest son. The Earl of Desmond is succeeded by his eldest son. Okay, sons can get killed by brothers can get killed by brothers, but there is still this legal thing, and whoever occupies the English throne can use the law to remove people. And one of the Earls of Desmond got beheaded at some stage. I know that when there was a weak king such as John, like the English lords are changing, the earldoms, etc., in Ireland are changing rapidly. But if an English king says, "Okay, Brian O'Neill, I depose you," Brian O'Neill says, "Yeah, so what?" Whereas if he says, "Mr. Garrett Fitzgerald, you're deposed," Mr. Fitzgerald or Lord Fitzgerald has some sort of a problem.
Yeah, it's very true. I was about to say something. Oh yeah, there is a comment that Michal posted up from TikTok there that I just want to answer before we pop over to the 14th century, which is, why was Meath dissolved as a province? Does anybody know? Owen, do you want to elaborate on that one? Or
I actually just cheated and looked and discovered that it was only officially dissolved in 1610. At least that's what Wikipedia is saying. I think it's basically because it got conquered by the Normans fairly early on. It became the Lacy territory.
Yeah,
and so therefore, I have a feeling that it gets overlooked and it gets reduced. And then you're dragging into the politics of the new colony, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call this new emerging Anglo-Norman, Anglo-Irish entity, whereby in the first 100 years, the first 150 years, there's a great turnover in like the big lords, and then the castles and lands change over. So it gets taken by the Normans fairly quickly, and I think they may not have understood it as a province. They may have today it's probably the same size as Yorkshire, one of the big English shires. So they didn't see it as a province. They may not have understood what a province meant.
Yeah, it's funny though, because Hugh de Lacy does get recognized as Lord of Meath, but I think it definitely disappears once the Fitzgeralds kind of take over that whole region. Well, the Kildare Fitzgeralds kind of take over that whole region and kind of blur it between the what was it, Dublin and the Butler territories and stuff. You're right, though. It does become very, very blurry after, well, even leading into 1169, because even before the Norman invasion of Ireland, especially after, I could literally talk all day about this, but anyway, especially after the death of Mael Shochnall II, who was High King of Ireland, it seems to get stretched out between fighting between Connacht and the Leinster regions, especially with the likes of Diarmid MacMurrough, and that dispute with Breffni and stuff. So,
because in a way, I think everyone says, "Oh, Ireland had 5 provinces."
Yeah.
It actually had more.
Yeah.
Because what's the Irish for Ulster? Ullad. Ullad gets reduced by the Kennel Owen.
Yeah.
Argilla as well. Because Ullad is kind of the northeast.
Mm.
You have the Kingdom of Illoch, the Kennel Owen, the Kennel Connell. Then you have Connacht, which I'm not up to date with the families who ruled there. Munster, you have there's Moon, South Munster, which is sort of Cork and Kerry. You have Ossory, as you mentioned. You have the O'Briens in Clare. Leinster is much smaller. So you have, and then you had the North Kingdoms. So you in reality, the idea of 5 provinces was a nice idea, but it was, and like Munster itself split, so it was more than 5 provinces. So Meath becomes a county, a lordship, and then later on the provinces reemerge.
Yeah. But I think going back to Meath, I think after the death of Mael Shochnall II, I think Meath, after his death, it seems to get kind of sandwiched between Leinster and Connacht, between the various Tuatha that are fighting and disputing over that land in the centre of Ireland. There doesn't seem to be a leader that comes out of Meath itself that's able to push everyone back that we've seen previously from the Clan Coleman.
And another thing would be the rise of Dublin, especially sort of beforehand. Dublin was like a feeder town or a purse for Meath, or the King of Land, whoever was the dominant king got the money. Then all of a sudden, Dublin is emerging, and Dublin is the capital.
I fully agree with that. And the MacMurroughs, especially when the MacMurroughs under the likes of Diarmid MacMail and the Moore occupied Dublin, Meath definitely gets pushed off to the side. And the reason why it gets heavily disputed is because of the fertile land that's there, and also because of what it represents. If you take Meath, you've got that real kind of identity of high kingship in Ireland, I think. So it definitely, instead of Clan Coleman becoming one of the main families in Ireland, their territory becomes the main area of fighting between the various Tuatha. And then when you have the Norman invasion of Ireland, Hugh de Lacy ends up taking over the territory and is referred to as Lord of Meath, but he ends up being assassinated. So once again, it becomes this kind of disputed land for ages. And I know Trim Castle is bunk in the middle of it with, the Mortimers somewhat dominating Trim for a while. But they never really kind of, because they spent so much time inside of England, they never really kind of identified themselves, as an Irish family and kind of branch out from there. They're always seen as the occupying English that own Trim Castle. So Meath never really gets its own identity in that, era. It's kind of just there as kind of English territory, and that's that. And then when the Fitzgeralds take over that territory of Trim and stuff, it's kind of just left there. Like Trim Castle is literally abandoned. It never kind of becomes its own thing again.
But in Meath as well, you also have Slane and Dunsany. So there are a series of small lordships, marcher lordships, which survive, of Slane and Dunsany survive to the present day. They were important areas. They were kind of general Dublin in the later Middle Ages because they were important castles for defending Dublin. So you had you didn't have a big lordship in Meath. So if you have the Kildares, but Kildare, so the Fitzgeralds of Kildare rather than Meath. So Meath gets swallowed a bit by them, and then the Marcher lordships who will jump from side. They'll go with whoever's strongest.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one for sure. TikTok trying to push us back into the conversation of the Anglo-Irish again, highlighting the fact that the Statutes of Kilkenny was definitely the changing point. And funny enough, I do actually have the Statutes of Kilkenny in the PowerPoint today. So you literally read my mind. And you're perfectly right in the comment section over on TikTok, because although there is, under the rule of Henry III in the 13th century, we do, as we're saying, quote unquote, the Anglo-Normans have define themselves as English in the 13th century. That all changes again once Edward I takes over. He brings in a lot of laws that kind of divide England and Ireland. And it's from that point that we start to see the foundations and definitely the transformation from these Norman lords that define themselves as English in the 13th century, then slightly transforming and starting to go from their old French culture and start transforming into this kind of Gaelic culture. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that there's a full transformation. I know that there's the saying, more Irish than the Irish themselves, which is still very much disputed and argued. And as I go through my main points here again, it will definitely dig up the fact, and you guys will definitely start arguing, were they more Irish than the Irish themselves, or were they still holding very much onto their English identity? Because I have a good few sources and stuff that would say differently. But you can definitely see that transformation starting to happen when Edward I takes over. And then as we're going, because the Gael are starting to radically beat back the English forces inside of Ireland with the Scottish War of Independence, with the arrival of Edward the Bruce onto the island of Ireland. And then we have the Little Ice Age kicking off in the island of Ireland, which makes life not just difficult for the Irish, of course, but also the English inside of Ireland. And then, the hammer being the Black Death suddenly kicks in. You also have the likes of the Fitzgeralds, especially the Desmond Fitzgeralds, which are being a little bit naughty at the time. And even allegedly, the likes of Desmond Fitzgerald allegedly pushing for the High Kingship of Ireland when he goes off and marries into the likes of the O'Briens and stuff. So there is definitely transformation and changes happening there inside of the island of Ireland. And we see a decline of the English population inside of these English ran territories, especially after the Black Death. And we start to see the Gael, the native Irish people, start to occupy the cities and stuff. So we start to hear the Irish language being spoken once again in city settlements such as Dublin, Waterford, Cork, and Limerick. But at the same time, inside of these settlements, they're still, like, if you read letters and stuff, they're still defining themselves as English. The civilized English and the wild Irish outside the walls. So I'm not going to turn around and say that, they're 100% identifying themselves as Irish Gaels and stuff. It seems to be quite complicated in reality. But at the same time, when Lionel of Antwerp, the Edward III's son, comes to Ireland, he full on sees that these people who allegedly identifies themselves as English are wearing Irish clothing, speaking the Irish language and playing hurling. And he brings out the Statutes of Kilkenny to prevent this transformation of these people that are between the world of the Gael, the Gaelic, and the English world as well. And that's why when I use the word Anglo-Irish, I'm talking about these people that are starting to appear in around the 14th, 15th, and 16th century. Oh, no, Neil, you look like you want to burst in and say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to stir things up a bit because we're talking about English settlers, but not all. There was, over the first couple of centuries, settlers. They weren't nice or anything. They were, commoners. Yeah. But not all of them were English.
Mm.
So that you had people coming from Flanders and places like that. Until the 19th century, in part of Wexford, there was Yolo language, and which was kind of a mixture of Old English with a bit of Flemish thrown in. And if you go on YouTube, you can find more stuff about it. And in the north of County Dublin, there was Fingalian, which I know less about. So you had other groups, because England was not just England. England was an empire as such. You had England, you had Wales, large parts of France, depending on the time, and I don't think the Low Countries, but an English soldier could have been from Scotland, from Wales, from London, from Calais, or from other places. So we have to take that into account as well.
Big time. Especially for the arguments and debates that we'll have for the next good few years, all the way up to 2030, when this discussion is going to pop up again and again and again, especially when France wants to celebrate its Norman heritage and stuff, which has started a whole load of arguments inside of the Irish Parliament, especially when, like, it's so strange because France wants to give us money to celebrate our Norman heritage, and yet there's people inside of the Irish Parliament don't want to accept this money because they feel it would undermine our heritage and history inside of the island of Ireland. But it's definitely something that we do need to engage and talk about. What is the Norman identity?
Finn Dwyer did a very, very good talk on that on his podcast.
Yeah, and it's only recent as well. I really should have chucked it into the today's chat and everything. And a great book that's going to come out next year. It was meant to come out this year, but it's been delayed for a bit. No surprise because of the amount of stuff that's happening politically. But a great book to pick up next year is going to be Invasions 1169. I can't wait for it because I can't wait to see what Sean Duffy has to say, especially in a reaction to this book that's come out last year as well, which was the medieval Irish kings and the English invasion, which, was a book to really shake up our understanding of the identity of the, originally the first wave in 1169 was referred to as the Knights of the Welsh Marches. But from a modern understanding, we always refer to them as the Cambro Normans. And then the second wave, which was 1172, which was the English Knights in Ireland, which we refer to from a modern interpretation as the Anglo-Norman Knights. However, in the last 2 years, we've been really shaking this up on, okay, so who were these people? And then as we enter into the 14th century and we talk about their identity inside of the statutes of Kilkenny, who are these people? And you have to remember, this is important to us because this is our DNA. Like the comment section is highlighting again and again and again. And it's the same with myself. I'm exactly the same. We have Norman DNA inside of us. So asking the question, who are we, especially this year when we have so much arguing between the migration into Ireland and we're still trying to define who we are as a people, it's definitely a very, very important conversation to have. For sure. And as Dr. O'Neill is highlighting, the fact that this is a very complicated conversation to have. Micheál, do you have anything else to chuck in there to add into the petrol onto a fire?
I was muted. I have no idea where we were as soon as you were replying to comments on TikTok.
Oh, yeah. Chuck in there. Any decent conversations or because I don't want to alienate the TikTok fans.
No, they're all copied into our private chat. So we had Blake was sort of asking, he was saying Connacht is huge in terms of, they're going back just quickly, I'll answer it though. Connacht is huge in terms of relativity. There were tons of clans, surely. And the answer is yes. Mostly the king group that is associated with Connacht is the Ebruin, which broke up into the Ebruin I, which is the O'Connors, the Ebruin Sola, who's the O'Flahertys, the Ebruin Emal, who are the O'Malleys, and the Ebruin Ebruin Brefna, who are the O'Rourkes and the O'Reillys. But the Ebruin Brefna and the Ebruin Emal aren't actually related to the O'Connors. That's a propaganda piece from the 13th century, where they grafted their genealogies. But basically, the Ebrun is the widest, the known tribal group, and you've got the Evina, who are the O'Kellys to the south. So that's Blake. And then it's another one, OTC. Who settled Irish inside unchanged colonial institutions today? I don't understand that question.
Because we don't really have, like, the institutions. There are no unchanged colonial institutions. Institutions changed all the time, but like, sort of, I don't know, Dublin Castle would be the oldest one, and that's run by Irish civil servants.
Yeah, I seen it this week when the president of Ireland had done her coronation inside of Dublin. I know why this is a conversation because I've seen a few TikTokers highlight the fact that, you know, it's great to see a woman inside of Dublin Castle being recognized as the Irish, doing her, being recognized as the Irish president inside the Dublin Castle and stuff, because for 800 years the British have occupied. But I feel like it feeds sort of into the myth that for 800 years we've been occupied by the British, when in reality it seems to be quite, complicated and stuff. I can understand the symbolism of it, we've been occupied for 800 years and all that stuff. But in reality, it's very, very, as Michal highlighted earlier, blurred. At times, especially when we go into the 15th century and we have this kind of Anglo-Irish identity, because as I highlight in the next map here, that Anglo-Irish territory is very kind of blurred between the Irish and the English. Like even the Anglo-Irish themselves, they're not paying the tax that they should be. The likes of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers are not paying their tax over to the English the way they should be. And in fact, you have the likes of Art MacMore Cavanagh in 1370, and then again in 1399, going into Dublin and literally taking the tribute. Like, Dublin is paying tribute to the MacMoras in the 14th and 15th century. So it's funny. And then you have the Fitzgeralds later on going into the Wars of the Roses, completely taking over the administration of Dublin. So the idea of 800 years of occupation is at times funny, do you know?
Yeah, and like, even that map is a bit dodgy.
Yeah,
because it's trying to impose a very fluid situation on, like, and they're like, for example, the O'Connor Kerry is missing. They were Gaelic lords in the northeast of Kerry, and there it seems to be like Earldom of Ormond is reaching Limerick City, which I don't think it did. And like, within the Earldom of Ormond, most people, while you would have had Kilkenny where there would have been English speakers, most of the people would have been speaking Irish. The same in the Earldom of Desmond, and probably there would have been a large number of Irish speakers in the Earldom of Kildare and within the Pale.
Yeah. What was it called? Michal, you haven't heard of that surname, have you? I know it's gone slightly off topic there. Just a question there in the comment section.
No, I haven't actually. That's how's it pronounced? Because if it's Rabbi or Rebi, or it may help its phonetic. If I get the phonetic, then I'll be able to sort of work back.
You haven't heard of it, Owen, have you?
No, but I know there was in the 1990s there was Rab C. Nesmith or something, a comedian, a comedy set in Scotland, and he had that as a first name or a similar name to that. Rab.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, and because I've never come across it when I was in school or anything in Ireland, I haven't come across that surname whatsoever.
Normally,
My
if I
wife just went
haven't,
out the door.
normally,
Go on, anyway.
I was going to say, normally if I haven't heard of it, normally it's an English name or possibly a Scottish name that's come across to Ireland. That's sort of my weaker area of study. So
It
unless of
it
the
could
Normans.
it could well be a version of a French, a Dutch, a German surname that went to England and got changed because like there's a lot, or
Mm,
a small village in England. I don't know.
mm. A lot of these comments now are just going slightly after the 16th century. We'll get to the 16th century in a bit because we're just in an hour in. So we'll definitely end up talking about the 16th century and then the transformation from Anglo-Irish into Old English and stuff. So I'll cover that in a bit in those comments there. Any other comments that you guys want to cover before I pop over to the 15th century and just discuss about the Anglo-Irish in the 15th century?
There's just someone is just commenting about castles in Munster.
Mm,
Um, in a way that was due to it's especially in the earldoms of Ormond and Desmond.
mm,
Uh, it's good land.
yeah.
It's some of the best farmland in Ireland. The Golden Vale, especially Limerick,
Mm.
Cork, Tipperary is good. So um,
I
that
noticed.
allowed,
Mm,
like,
I
there would have been a lot of castles there to guard the land.
mm.
They were rich enough. Other ones would have been there to impress. So that's probably why.
It's fascinating because from the get go, when I was studying the tower houses in Ireland, I noticed that in the northwest of the island of Ireland, the castles are. They're kind of like more like tower houses, and they feel like they're more there to protect the cattle. It seems to be more part of the whole cattle raiding culture, and then even the usage of the words around walls and all that kind of stuff. So, when it comes down to cattle raiding culture and stuff, it seems to be very influencing the castles that we see up in the north west of the island of Ireland. But then when we look at the southeast of the island of Ireland, a lot of techniques, funny enough, that appear in both Europe and in the Middle East when it comes down to castle construction, when it comes down to the traditional siege warfare that we see in Europe and the Middle East. All these techniques appear in the southeast of the island of Ireland. And also, it's very, very interesting that when we go into the 100 Years' War, and especially into the Wars of the Roses in Ireland, first off, the 100 Years' War, when you have that Talbot Butler feud during the 100 Years' War, when you have Talbot going in there and trying to fight the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds, and then later on going into the Wars of the Roses in Ireland, when we have even more sieges between the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds over the title of Lord Deputy of Ireland. That we see more classical, conventional style sieges, which, in my opinion, probably influenced why the castles are designed differently to the way they are up in the north west of Ireland. Because even if you look at the likes of Bunratty Castle and Blarney Castle, which is occupied by Gaelic families, but at the same time, those castles seem to be very much influenced from more of a conventional style of warfare compared to what we see up in the northwest of the island, which kind of more have a tower house approach, more have, kind of being able to see around them to check up on their cattle and stuff. And then even the usage of the terms of walls and stuff, which seem to reflect and then debate, could these, walls be able to protect cattle during raids? But then when we look at the south, east of the island of Ireland, and we look at those castles, it seems to be impossible to bring cattle inside of the walls. But at the same time, if you're looking at it from a defensive perspective, those castles are absolutely amazing at defending men and women as well, and children, of course, inside of the keeps and walls of the castle and stuff. And then as people are penetrating through, we can see many of these defenses, such as being able to, the ability of being able to pour sand with boiling water off the walls and being able to chuck stones down on top of the enemy and stuff. We can see these defenses on the southeast of the island of Ireland. And when we look at the literature, we can see these defenses being used. And we can even see, attachments of guns and stuff being chucked onto there. So I do find that very interesting when looking at castle developments
But
inside of the island of Ireland.
castles had a role far beyond defence.
Well, it's true as well.
Yeah, like 90% of Irish castles are tower houses, which are essentially fortified homes.
Yeah.
The Gaelic lords seem to love building tower houses, in part because it was cheap. They did it, I'm convinced, to impress.
Yeah.
Many tower houses would have had a hall.
Yeah.
So a lot of the halls are stone, some were wooden. And that's where they would have lorded it, if you want to use it's where if you went to pay rent, you would have paid there. If you wanted to ask the Lord something, you would see him there. He's impressing you. But at the same time, the Gaelic Irish had no compulsion in knocking down their own castles. The English were coming, so they knocked down their own castles, kind of going like, boo hoo hoo, you're not going to catch my castle, I just took it down, which the English struggle to understand.
Yeah.
Well, we also have reference, obviously, they're referring to, in some places like the O'Donnells, have a reference to a palace in the annals. Now, obviously, this is there. It's not a palace like we would think in a Romanesque, King Louis Bourbon of France, sort of. Can't remember the name of it, but but they are referring to it as their palace, and this is another reflection of European sort of influences coming in and the terminology being used. But it's also how they envisage it as this grand status, this like, look, I've built this palace, this grand monument to my wealth, my prestige, my lineage. But at the same time, like Orna says, within, I can't remember which O'Donnell it is, but within a generation, this grand palace is gone. It's not being used by the next generation. It's all but like lost. By most historians, unless you study the area of Donegal. So yeah, and this is meant to be like a grand statement. So like I said, the Irish don't have a problem with the moving. And Owen can actually clarify a statement when I asked him on one of his recent lives about the fact that one of the McCarthys had to be crowned outside of a normal inauguration site. How this would sort of be interpreted, and it just you probably want to clarify that a bit better, but that just shows that there is a great sentiment to certain places, but there's also a certain sense of practicality about it as well, in that holding this sentiment to a specific location when you are surrounded by these encroaching Normans isn't really best advised.
It's funny you mentioned palace, because outside Killarney, actually near one of the most touristy parts of the Killarney Lakes, there is an area called Pallis, Pallis, and that was one of McCarthy Moore's main bases. It was his palace at some stage. It got spelt in Irish like that, and then the name stayed. There may be a castle there. I'm not sure. I'd have to check, or like the ruin of a castle.
But yeah, you're still bang on right there, Owen, when you turn around and say that tower houses became the main assembly area. Just to update everybody, originally the main assembly area, and I'm obviously up for correction on this one, was the monastic settlements during the early medieval period, especially between 550 going up to around the 12th century. And then as we go into the High Middle Ages, and it's very much debated if the O'Connors had tower houses in Ireland before the arrival of the Normans, the Mountain Bailey castles. But regardless, we see that transformation starting to happening in the High Middle Ages as you go into the late medieval period. And definitely by the time we get up to, the statutes of Kilkenny and stuff, we can see assemblies happening, not just for the Gael of Ireland, everything, but even for the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds. Most of their assemblies, from my understanding, are happening inside of these castles as well. Like when they're doing their parliament, they're not running their parliament in Dublin. They're having assemblies in the likes of Kilkenny Castle and also Kildare Castle as well. The name of Kildare Castle now has popped out of my head. And there's a few people in my comment section going to get mad at me now in a second, and I apologize. I can't remember.
Maynooth?
That's the one. Maynooth Castle is the one where they're having their assemblies alike. of the Irish Parliament, which is, in my opinion, like very similar to the same kind of. I know there's differences, especially when we look at from the English literature, especially when they have to wear English dress. Like later on, in the period of the Tudors and stuff, we have Gael that are going to what was it, Irish Parliament, but they have to wear English dress and stuff. So from an English perspective, it's still very English, but from my perspective, looking at the literature, there still seems to be that kind of hint of Gael going into the Irish Parliament, especially in the 15th century before the arrival of the Tudors.
Well, you also have the Burkes who famously go across and submit and promise to wear English dress, and they wear English dress to Parliament, and then they immediately cross the Shannon and literally just take off their, in some grand gesture, take off their English clothing and don like Irish clothing across the banks. It's either across. Now, this is obviously their own words, their own sort of propaganda, but they're stating that they did it like in full view of the English garrison on the other side of the Shannon. Like, and we donned the saffron. But that, I have no doubt. But that's, even if that's physical act never happened, it certainly conveys the imagery that they wanted to put across to the reader and to the people of the time, that they are being forced to do this thing to comply to Englishness, but at the same time, when they get home, when they get to their night dressing gowns and their slippers on, they're listening to that Irish music, not English music, to go to sleep to.
It's interesting as well, because the reason why I highlighted this next picture is because this literal book is written by the Burkes. The Burkes actually put together an entire book where they kind of highlight themselves in their Anglo-Irish armor. Now, in a bit, I'll complicate things again, but I just want to highlight that by the time we do get into the 15th and 16th century, that the Anglo-Irish their armor is starting to evolve away from the typical English armor. Now, at the same time, this is a period where people have multiple sets of armor, and I need to highlight that because that becomes very important in a bit. But it's very interesting that, and I've seen both at this point now English historians on YouTube and myself and the other community and stuff highlighting the fact that I think it was me maybe I'm up for correction if someone wants to correct me in the comment section, but I maybe it was me that turned around first and says, or it was Rachel, one of the other, that turned around in a live stream and said, why did they highlight the fact when we look at their effigies and stuff? I think I've an effigy down here. Okay, I apologize. I forgot to put one of the effigies in. But there's effigy based on this design here by the butlers, by the way, who are meant to be the most English ones. And the butlers themselves depict themselves in an Anglo-Irish armor set, which is designed for cattle raiding, so when people of the time would have seen this, the imagery of them going off and doing cattle raiding in their armor would have, and it's the same with the Burkes, once again depicting themselves in their Anglo-Irish armor going off to have this imagery of committing a cattle raid, which is interesting. Why do the butlers, the Burkes, and these Anglo-Irish families depict themselves in a very Irish way going off to commit cattle raiding, even in their effigies, which I find very, very interesting at the time. And as you highlight there, Micheál, the Burkes at the time who are going to Irish Parliament are also going over, hopping over the River Shannon, taking off their clothes as a form of protest, and then putting back on their Gaelic clothes before popping into their castle. And perhaps even, at least they're going off to Irish Parliament 1 second. The next second, they're going over to their tower house where they're probably having Gaelic assemblies and doing their own parliament, private parliament inside of there, which really highlights that these people are Anglo-Irish. There are people between the Gaelic world and the English world at the time. Anything else you guys want to advance on that one, or are we good?
No, well, I think that we've been talking about blurred lines and flurried lines, so I am sure that if you could get a time machine and jump back to the 13th century, the 12th century, you would be, and you saw two armies getting ready to fight, you'd be surprised by, like, people would be wearing armor that's like, say, a helmet or a coat of armor that's 100 years old because, or 50 years old. It got inherited.
Yeah.
Other people would have, like, maybe some people from Tyrone, Gaelic people from Tyrone, would be wearing armor that had got plundered or captured after, from a dead Norman knight. There would have
Mm.
been a great blurring on both sides, and then you'd see this is the so-called English army. Hold on, why are all these people like dressed like Gaelic, sort of, and they're
Yeah.
not even speaking English? Both sides would have been blurred. Um, Someone's asking about the Fitzmaurices.
Mm.
Can I just give a quick
Yeah. Is that on our
Gar-
own comment section or the
yeah,
TikTok?
yeah, yeah.
It's
Garlic
not
is
in our
asking
own.
about the,
It's
the
in our own.
Fitzmaurices. The
Mm.
Fitzmaurices were a minor branch of the Desmonds of Fitzgerald. They
Mm.
were based in Lixnaw, which Lixnaw, it's slightly north of Tralee. Um, they had a very complicated relationship with the Earls of Desmond. Uh, they were often close to O'Connor Kerry, and like they had theoretically they were under the Earl of Desmond, but they were always semi-independent. In the 9 Years' War, they were very strongly pro Hugh O'Neill. They survived the 9 Years' War. I think in the Cromwellian Wars, they were on the sort of the Irish side, but not sure about that. But in the 18th century, they anglicized themselves and they married into an English family. I can't remember which one. And in Lixnaw, they had a big, big mansion and they became fabulously wealthy. And then the the money got blown and like they no longer exist. I You can find a mansion in Kerry, but I think there's not much of it left.
Mm. Anything else you guys want to elaborate on when it comes down to the questions and stuff? Mihal, you seem to be eyeing up someone there.
Yeah, no, I'm just making sure that similar questions are being answered. Uh, but I think some of them we've just probably gone way past that point in the topic. So
Someone's
maybe
asking about Sheila the gigs because I just see it now. It's Sheila the gigs are medieval. They're not
Mm.
pagan or anything like that, and they're not just Irish. They're found in England and elsewhere. Um, like I think they're kind of related to gargoyles in a way. They're to remind people to be good in some sort of way. Um, Ronald Hutton is very good talking about Sheila the gigs and their real origins.
Mm. Oh, definitely. Just to highlight as well, just get back into the conversation before I hop back over, just to finish off my side of the conversation before we dive deeper into the whole Anglo-Irish thing, and then also dive into the comment section and stuff. So basically, at this point, we can identify that the Anglo-Irish do have their own unique kind of Irish Gaelic armor. But the keynote here, which definitely fits into the style of warfare that we see in Ireland at the time, of this kind of cattle raiding culture, where you have here we can see the Gallo glass and the Kerns going in there to steal cattle, and we know from the laws that are brought in by the Desmond Fitzgeralds to the Irish Parliament, the coin and levy laws that allow them to raise these Gaelic military forces, and we can imagine the Desmond Fitzgeralds themselves dressed like this, going off to do the cattle raids and stuff. And in many ways, not just part of Irish warfare inside of Ireland, but also very the symbolism, the symbols that go with it as well. As you guys highlighted there, that these people would have brought the weapons of their grandfathers over, and they would have brought weapons that were kind of had a kind of mythology behind them and stuff, because it was important for the cattle raids, especially if you're reading the likes of the Finn Cycle and the Tomba Cooley, which is very romanticized within Anglo-Irish communities at the time. Here's another photo just to kind of get it out of the way of the depiction and how the Anglo-Irish wanted to depict themselves at the time. But at the same time, these people haven't completely abandoned their English ways as well. They're still connected to England, believe it or not. We can see that during the Wars of the Roses, where you have the various families such as the Desmond Fitzgeralds and the Butlers, who, although take part in cattle raiding, have Brehon law. We have Brehon judges going into the likes of Kilkenny and also to the Desmond Fitzgeralds to bring in Irish law to the Gaels, but at the same time, they haven't completely abandoned ship when it comes down to their English culture. We can see that in the Wars of the Roses, where we have the Butlers and Fitzgeralds going to the London court, taking part in battles inside of England, but they have English armor. So not only do they have Irish armor, as we can see here, but if we look at recent work that's come out, when it comes down to the Battle of Stokefield, for example, the Anglo-Irish still have English armor. And although they do apply Gaelic warfare, such as the usage of kerns and hobler horses into their Anglo-Irish military, they still have English forces as well. They're still using pole arms. They're still using longbowmen. They still have full plate armor to be able to hold the shield wall or spear wall, depending on your interpretation. But regardless, this is an English-Irish group of people at the time. They are a people that's between both the English world and the Irish world at the time. So I definitely, when people are talking and arguing about the definition of what it is to be Anglo-Irish, a lot of people look at it from an ethnic identity. And that's not how I applied the word Anglo-Irish. The usage of the word Anglo-Irish in the 15th century, from the way I use the word, is a people that's between both the English world and the Irish world at the time. Anything else you guys want to elaborate on before I pop over to the comment section?
No, that's fine.
I just have another depiction there of how I actually put this into what I did as I got a hold of imagery of both the Gaelic women and also imagery from the Anglo-Irish as well, and how they dressed. And I kind of, when I put this into ChatGPT, it kind of gave me this image of how people would have dressed in the southeast of the island of Ireland at the time, that we can see those influences from both the Gaelic world and the English world going into the 15th century. So not only do we have a people that would have had their set of armor, which would have been very Gaelic, they would have also had their set of armor that's very English, but even the way they dressed would have been between both the English world and the Gaelic world as well. So I think that definition of Anglo-Irish is definitely very fitting, and that's another depiction of the way they would have dressed going into the later stages of the Wars of the Roses, going into the Tudor era as well. And another depiction of this is a depiction of Gallowglass on the mainland of Europe, which is a lot of arguments and debates, because this is the artist at the time, a German artist. His name is literally popped out of my head. It's one of the most famous German artists in the world.
Dürer.
That's the one. Dürer wasn't using first-hand accounts of Gallowglass and Kern when he was doing this drawing. It was actually second-hand descriptions to him. So another man came up to him, described what Gallowglass and Kern looked like, and then he started drawing it. So this is not a first-hand account. But it's interesting as well, because at the time, we did have trade going between Kerry going into the Iberian Peninsula, and then from the Iberian Peninsula to Florence at the time. So it is in the world of possibility that we perhaps, I was talking to Rachel from the Creative Contessa about this, and she was highlighting the fact that if you have, various lords and stuff moving between Ireland to Florence, you still needed protection to go with them. And that's perhaps where Florentines may or may not have seen Gallowglass and Kern being bodyguards to the Desmond Fitzgeralds going to Florence. But that's up for debate and argument for sure.
Hiram Morgan has written about this picture. He had a book full of illustrations that came out a few years back about the visit of the Habsburg guy who came to Kinsale, I think in 1518. Yeah. And he writes about that, and he shows where some of the armor and stuff is common to Europe. Others is copied off pictures of Africans. Um, and then the Irish, the famous Gaelic mantle, the Irish mantle, that was being exported to Europe.
Yeah.
So Dura probably had seen that because it it was regarded, I think, as a luxury item because it was a good export in exchange for wine and stuff.
Mm. Maybe see, I think this is an interesting comment as well, just to elaborate on, because to be honest with you guys, I've just finished my main waffle for this week and everything on why I use the term Anglo-Irish and who the Anglo-Irish are. So I'll start digesting and eating away at the comments, and I'll also talk amongst the lads when they want to expand on whatever comments and stuff, or just the topic on who are the Anglo-Irish. So I'll start going through the comments there. Just starting off with this one here, maybe just see the Anglo-Irish families what had power as mini warlords, most likely thinking about gaining Ireland for themselves. I think the problem I have with that term is it's a little bit too simplified because of the fact that, as we've discussed before with the whole usage of king groups, that the problem is, especially when you look at the likes of the Desmond Fitzgeralds and stuff, is that they're very much molded into the society itself. Like the Desmond Fitzgeralds have, a lot of links between the O'Briens and the McCartys in particular, and then the McSweeneys when they immigrate into the Munster region. So the problem I have with that is this, and what was Owen O'Neill had brought it up as well when we were discussing this map of the 15th century, is that it's a bit too clean cut, this map is. And I have the same problem as well with this map. I had an entire rant on my short last week where I kind of just don't like these defining lines because they change not just every season, but they were blurred to even start with, because we have these king groups that are blurred amongst themselves between marriage alliances, fosterage, and also if you go into someone else's territory and take one of their sons as a hostage or daughter as a hostage, it kind of blurs between the communities. And like people going from one tower house over to another tower house, they could have easily bumped into one of their brothers or cousins or sisters, even if this is a completely foreign, kind of bloodline foreign clan to them. And at the same time, if you were to have a civil war amongst your own clan fighting over the title of Taoiseach, head chieftain, weirdly enough, it's a completely foreign clan that would come in and help you just because you were fostered into their family when you were about, the age of 7 to 14.
It's funny, the thing of fosterage continued until the early 19th century in some places. Daniel O'Connell was fostered. He was born in Carron House, which is just outside Carsavine. His father was sort of not very wealthy, but not poor. But his first 3 or 4 years of life, he was sent up to a basic to a peasant family in Foilmore, I think, which is up the mountains. So this tradition of fosterage kept going. I wanted to answer a question. Dennis has asked a question about the reigning English royal families having Gaelic blood in their ancestry, such as Princess Diana. I know that Queen Elizabeth, and therefore I've forgotten his name, whoever the king is now. Charles.
Oh, Charles, yeah.
Yeah.
They are descended from Brian Boru, because the Earls of Thomond became very, very, very anglicized and are still are, and they married in. Like, you take anyone, all the British royal family, they have German blood, they have Greek blood, they have Irish blood. Sort of, there are a lot. I know that I think Diana could be descended from the Butlers.
Yeah, there actually, it was what was it? When I was in University College of Cork, it was Brian O'Shea, who actually, funny enough, is the head of the O'Shea clan. He was in university at the time arguing about the link between Princess Diana and the Butlers, that there is actually, and it goes back to they've been heavily connected to each other since the what was it called? The Boleyn's, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Was
the
it Anne Boleyn and
Boleyns,
yeah,
the
stuff? Yeah,
Butlers.
Lynns, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
actually, the Butlers, some are descendant of William Marshall as well, because
yeah.
all these people, they married each other.
Mm.
Like the O'Neills married into Kildare's a few times. So all these elites married each other, and so you have everybody's related to everybody.
Well, that's the thing I try to, because someone said before about William the Conqueror uh, and how my family came across William the Conqueror, and I said to them basically, William the Conqueror only handed out 10 earldoms. There was only 10 earldoms in the whole of England and 170 baronies.
Mm.
So there's 170. Now, some of these might have been a couple of baronies to a family or cadet branches of the same family, but you're effectively looking at 180 families, let's just say. But let's break it down to 150 for a cleaner argument, right?
Mm.
150 families 1,000 years ago. And considering that when you get past sort of like 10 generations, you have multiple lines. You have the same names appear in the same line over and over again, because there's just more people. You're related to more people than were alive at that time. So we're all related.
Like I read someone was talking about 99 hostages, sort of using mathematics to say he I don't know how many million descendants he would have now. Sort of when you go back far enough, we're all probably have some sort of link to Brian Boru or to Nile of the Nine Hostages. We all have some Norman blood, Norman genes in us,
Because of the
etc., etc.
because of the explosion of the Irish Americans, I think Nile of the Nine Hostages DNA is rivaling Genghis Khan. It's somewhere between Genghis Khan, Charlemagne, and Nile of the Nine Hostages. But that's because of the explosion of the Irish Americans, and now we have the explosion of Irish Australians now as well. So Nile's DNA is definitely getting out there. Like,
That's Kevin was sort of asking about DNA as well, and I'll just quickly touch on it while we're on the subject. First, he'd said about the I can't remember what haplogroup it was, haplogroup it was, but I do remember it was the Leinster haplogroup with the Kavanaghs and the Burns, RMZ22, I think it is. Anyway, yes, they are. Most, if you're finding Norman and Welsh surnames or names attributed with Norman, Welsh, English, Scottish surnames, but they have traditionally Leinster haplogroups or clusters that are associated with Irish, Gaelic sort of peoples. Normally, you can put that down to names changing over time through homogenization, through a multitude of reasons, marriage, taking maternal names, just taking on a name of your overlord. There's a million reasons, and they're not always non-paternal events like children outside of wedlock, etc. So most of our surnames were anglicized. It's a very common theme in Irish history and our naming. So that's most likely. As for those haplogroups ending up in Ireland due to raiding, yes, but it would have made such a small impact. The raiding that happened in England had such a small genetic impact on mainland Britain in comparison to whenever you look at the other surge of migratory groups that are coming in. Also, you're saying about Uhtred of Bamborough. He seems to be of the same haplogroup, or he seems to be of a male line paternal descent of Ireland. I believe his male line links back to the Hiberno Norse, the Hiberno Scandinavian links. So just because someone was in that sphere of influence of being part of the Hiberno Scandinavian world doesn't mean we normally associate them with being Scandinavian with an Irish mother, but it did happen the other way too. You could have an Irish mother with a Irish father with a Scandinavian mother. We now know that same thing happened in Iceland. There was a large myth for that. They said that the Irish group's DNA testing why they had a large thing for Irish DNA is because of all the women slaves that they brought across
Yeah,
with the marriages. But actually, they've now found plenty of records that there's plenty of Irish male DNA in Iceland too. So that just shows another blending of those worlds. So DNA's obviously answering a lot of questions, but also raising a lot of questions at the same time. And we won't always get all the answers that we want, unfortunately.
I just want to answer a comment by Davey. He said, "Owen O'Neill, we're all kings." Thanks, Owen. But okay, yes, we may all be the descendants of kings, but we're also the descendants of peasants.
Yeah.
So,
I was about to say that because, okay, this is one of the biggest problems I have with direct translations going from Irish to English. It's that word "ri," W-I fada. People see "ri" and its direct translation as king. It's like, you do realize you're king of just a fort, like not fort, but like multiple forts of 30, right? But that makes you just the "ri" of 30 forts, you know? And this is the problem I have with the direct translation, because that would be the equal to, what was it called? A baron, a lord. That's not the equivalent to a centralized king that you would see in England going into the High Middle Ages. Because the problem I have then is that when people see the word "ri," W-I fighter, and you see this with loads of historians, sometimes I even see academics, English academics and so on and so forth, turning around and saying, "Oh, this is 150 centralized kings all fighting amongst themselves." And it's like, but that's because you're getting Irish and directly translating it outside of its context. Half of these kings would be the equivalent of a lord who's also blurred into societies with other lords and stuff. So it's not a clean cut, you are the king of this land. You know, you'd be the equivalent of a landlord, in my opinion, unless Owen wants to evolve onto that one.
No, I'm agreeing with you, but like when there was a predominance of Riha, I think, at the same time there was so in England.
Yeah.
I know that people now, you had the famous Saxon, what was it? Not heptagon. Well, supposedly, I think there was 7 kingdoms, whereas there never actually was. There were, it was much more flexible. You had different sort of kings. In Wales, you had some sort of hierarchy of kings as well. And it also moved, like changed. In Ireland, probably, you had maybe Kenlow and Kenel Collin, Argilla, the Rory O'Connor group, the O'Briens, McCarthy's, McMurray's, so you may have had 150 calling themselves Ri, but at any one time, probably there's 5 to 10 who were powerful enough to be considered one.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other ones, Mihal's always talking about forgeries, etc. Sort of these family trees, they're embellished, shall we say. So 200 years later, Mr. Joe McCarthy in a tiny little place, his great grandson writes down "ri" in the book, sort of where he may never have used that word himself. Sort of, but like he was made into he's made into a king posthumously. I know the Mormons, for example. If you become a Mormon, you can convert your ancestors. So this was like that. You were giving your ancestors royal and noble titles.
A book I definitely would advise people to get, and it shows you ranks. It's not a case of what was it called? You have like what was it? Barons, dukes. What was it? Sorry, barons, dukes, or no, it's the other way around. Sorry, barons, barons, earls, dukes, and then you have the king on top. It's more of a rank system. Like my Irish now has gone completely out the window, but I would definitely pick up Fergus Kelly's Early Irish Law, which explains how the rank system works. Much more easier than what I'm trying to explain now. And it explains like, okay, so you have this much cattle, you have this much ring forts and stuff. So you go into this bracket of the rank system in Ireland, and that it's not a clean cut, oh, well, I'm king, so I'm, centralized and lord of this land itself. You're tied into the land. And also on top of that, there is a land, an entire rank system. But as you were highlighting there, Owen O'Neill, you're still talking about, when it comes down to the word re compared to the late medieval period, the early medieval period is still a period that's dominated by warlords that we can see not just in Ireland, but you see in England and the mainland in Europe. And it's not until we see the arrival of Charlemagne with his little Charlemagne Renaissance that we start to bring in more ideas of centralization, which does start to seep into Ireland going into the Viking Age, where we start to see the word in the Annals of Ulster, we start to see the word re-Éireann popping up, and the usage of more of the, king of the island of Ireland rather than, the king of the Gael, which I think it is interesting in itself, especially with the arrival of the Scandinavians onto the island, that we kind of, it's funny because at the same time, Brian Boru kind of becomes the only person that really, perhaps maybe even Flann Sinna at some stage, starts to bring in more centralized ideas, but you still have a lot of people that want to keep to the classical warlord kind of Ireland of the early medieval period, and there's kind of a resistance to change in many regards. But God, it's a complicated question I can literally talk about all day, but it's still a good point that when you're having a discussion about the early medieval period, you're still dealing, to simplify it, you're still dealing with an era of, warlords and I am the man with the biggest stick. And when we use the term in most of these conversations online, to simplify the conversation down to its very maximum, when we're using the term High King, we're basically saying, okay, so this is the guy with the biggest stick at this, particular time. Because even the Annals of Ulster and the usage of, Re-Roic amongst the Enail Confederation, that understanding of that title, geez, that changes so much throughout the 200 years, even in the early medieval period. Because one minute they're just, the man with the biggest stick living in Tara. Sometimes they have full control of everyone who identifies as the Enail. And sometimes they're even able to push out to the likes of Munster and over to Connacht and enforce their cattle tribute there. So even these titles that they give themselves amongst the early medieval period changes depending on the conversation and the era that you're talking about. Yeah, that's me trying to simplify everything.
No, it's true. It's true. Like Owen said, people embellish even if you're. So you a great example of the embellishment of it, as well as if we look at the medieval Greek sort of pottery and their representation of the Iliad, and they use in the armor for that time period to show the story of what's happened during the Iliad. But obviously anyone who's knows anything about Bronze Age armor, it looks nothing like the phalanx that we would see, units that we would see later on, and the hoplites and whatever. So, and that sort of terminology can be used in Irish mythology. When people were writing their own descriptions of their own ancestors, they're using concepts and language for their time period, rather than how it's been represented in the time period of Niall Nogalach. We now see, when they write about Niall, they're sort of saying he's this king of Ireland. He was probably no more than a warlord of a very small segment of Northern Ulster, as the northeast or northwest, sorry, or maybe Rathcruin, if you want to go for that. The Enail sort of come from Rathcruin in northern Connacht. The same applies to even the Bible, the King David, where he's sort of this embellishment, and actually he was probably just a warlord of a tiny settlement. But it's that embellishment that sort of goes on with human history, that when we look back and we apply what is a king, Niall was a king, and I'm writing this 500 years after Niall. Well, and a king in my era, they are provincial kings. So suddenly it becomes a provincial. Not always was there's this. It's not always done with malice, but it's it's sometimes done out of context. Interestingly, there's Dr. Cormac McSporran often states that the Dal Fiatach of the northeast of Ulster, long rivals of the Ullid, consider themselves a true Ullid, seem to be one of the very few families that ever altered their own genealogies. Whatever they have written down seems to be pretty accurate, mainly because they were continuously arguing with the Cruithne who were the original Ulid. So yeah, just a wee factoid there.
Happy days. Okay, so going back over to the comment section there, I'm getting to a stage now where there's way too many questions to answer. So I apologize to anyone's question that I skip over or cover. Just this one here. Do you guys want to elaborate on this one, or is this just a fun fact I'll shove up that the Annals of Ulster was compiled around 1498? Are we all good to go?
That's fine. You can go on.
But
Hope it is.
yeah, it's good fact.
Anything else you guys want to tear out of the comment section there before we push on?
Not really. There's so much I've lost track.
Yeah,
I think the most important one is M. Doyle is a legend. I'll go for that. Yeah.
Nice.
Wiggles, thank you very much.
Actually, I think the last comment there from Davy Jones is quite important in relation to the theme we're discussing, Anglo-Irish, sort of like the Bruces were Normans that came into Scotland, but they become Scotch. When does, or for how long does someone have to be in a country before they become part of that country? Like, it's when do the Anglo-Irish become Irish?
But it's funny because you can see the roots of this argument starting in the 14th century at the very start of the 100 Years' War, when Edward III starts to bring in, laws that pretty much make it so he's milking the Irish economy into the English economy. And you can see that resistance with the Fitzgeralds. The Fitzgeralds even blatantly go off and marry into the O'Brien family. And then there's an entire conspiracy that the Desmond Fitzgeralds are looking to become the High Kings of Ireland, an accusation that was made by the Butlers. And then on the flip side, the Butlers seem to be very loyal to the English crown, but at the same time, they're slowly, especially after the Black Death, becoming very Gaelicized as well. So I found the Butlers of the 15th century. Now, I know later on when we go into the 17th and 18th century, they start to take on that kind of, old English identity, but still take on a very Irish identity at the same time, especially when they become like the head of the Irish for the Irish Confederacy, and also fight with the Irish in the Jacobite and Williamite Wars. So even going into those eras, the Butlers take on a very complicated relationship. But anyway, back to the main conversation. The Butlers seem to take on a very kind of, we are English, but at the same time blur the lines by taking on Irish judges, and also start to take on Irish dress as well. And they're speaking Irish. We have an endless amount of literature of them just outright communicating with the Desmond Fitzgeralds in Irish. So we can start to see the foundation of that in the 14th century, and then becoming more and more a blur going into the 15th century as well. So it's funny,
But
and I think
just to turn the thing on its head for a bit, when after Norman, who's the first English king who's English?
Well, you see, this is funny because I was thinking about this yesterday as well.
It's 200 years, if not 300 years, before there's an English speaking.
Yeah, this is funny.
Then jump ahead to 1690.
Yeah,
and then or 1707, I think, whenever 1715, and they're all German speaking.
Yeah,
but no one, they don't. The Irish are all hung up about this. The English just the king is German, but we call him English.
Yeah. This is what's hilarious as well, is at the same time we have a bunch of French speakers, that they're hanging around they spend, most of these guys spend most of their time inside of the courts in Paris, like Paris, for example, instead of their own English court. And even like up to the 100 Years' War, there's times when they go into the court in Paris and give tribute to the French king. You know, they take a knee. Well, there's all these myths where they didn't really take a knee. They actually did so-and-so thing, like they flipped the king and all this kind of stuff. The English always have some kind of mythology of them taking the knee. But ultimately, when I look at the source itself, it has them taking the knee and giving tribute to the French king. And the reason for that is because up to the 100 Years' War, a lot of these English kings were seen as Norman vassals, which also blurs the interpretation of what is a Norman. Because it's just funny, because at the same time, you have Normans living in Normandy, being born in Normandy, and have Norman culture. And then you have all these branches that are kind of having their own identity at the same time. So it's funny, the term Norman. But regardless, until the 100 Years' War breaks out, many of these English kings inside of the French court are seen as branches of House Normandy. Even House Anjou are seen as French vassals inside of England. And it's not until we get into the 100 Years' War itself with Edward III, then we have them defining themselves as trying to define themselves as English. And I highlight the fact that they are trying to define themselves as English, because at the same time, Thomas Becket is still hunting in the background of the English court, because the Anglo-Saxons are still defining themselves as independent from the French and are using St. Thomas Becket as kind of that kind of symbol of resistance. And that's why Edward III, when he's invading into France, uses St. George's Cross to try to get rid of this Thomas Becket and all this Anglo-Saxon stuff. We are English. Here's our symbol. This is St. George's Cross. And we're fighting, you know, for as good, Christians against the French, you know. And even on top of that, they're still speaking French. They're still like, you still have the Anglo-Saxons who have their own native language, but Edward III and all of his nobles are all speaking French at each other. And it's not until we get up to Henry V that we're starting to get our own unique French language, in, you know, the foundation of what is English today, starting to appear with Henry V. But we still don't see or identify the English that we know today until we go into the Tudor era. It's not until the Tudors take over, who are Welsh, by the way.
One or not. One of Elizabeth's titles that she claimed was Queen of France.
Yeah, do you know? And Henry, as you said there, or not, Henry VII, who is, you know, and he does successfully get it. He identifies himself as the new King Arthur when he arrives in Wales. But he spent his entire childhood and he got his entire education inside of the court of Brittany. He was, when he rocked up and when he was inside of the English court, his natural, the way he spoke, the way he would dress was of a Brittany culture. You know, he was taking on fashion of Brittany. So even he himself looked more like a man of Brittany than a Welshman at the period. And he does, like, don't get me wrong, he really does try his best to try to adopt Welsh culture into Ireland, England. Jesus, where am I? So where his predecessors had done everything to try to completely obliterate Wales, Henry VII, on the other hand, he does his best to try to bring Welsh culture into our English culture, but he completely fails, because this is a man from Brittany. It's not from Wales. And he can't even speak the Welsh language. Well, he can to a certain degree, but not to the standard of the Welsh themselves. He doesn't even have a Welsh language, accent. He's got a Brittany accent. So it's funny, and then his sons, Henry VIII, he does have a son. His first son is called King Arthur, and he's meant to be the person, once again, to bring up this flame of, hey, we're Welsh people. We are the true British people. Look at us. We've taken back our island. But because his son passes away, you've got Henry VIII, who's, once again, a full-on Englishman, and that's where we start to get more of a foundation of what it is to be English. Go on there, Michal.
He is a full-on here. I'd say his daughter was more for the... But we do see a lot of Welsh descended nobility being given land and titles in England. And Henry does bring in cousins of his from the Ap Tudor line and the Griffith line that are related to his wider king group. In fact, Cromwell's family, paternal family, were brought across from Wales. So Oliver Cromwell,
Ah.
whoever doesn't know, is actually paternally from the Welsh royal line of Gwynedd, I believe. And his family were brought across to the Huntingdon areas by the Tudor monarchs. So
what you're
he
saying
does.
there, Michal, is that we should have our natural hatred towards the Welsh, not the English.
No, a natural hate for Welshmen who try to be English, maybe.
All right.
So Southern Wales. No, I'm sorry to offend.
Yeah, I was about to say that, but I was like, I better not go past that line there. We're starting World War in the comment section.
That's it. It's all kicking off in Wales because. No, but yes. So it's There's again. It just shows that he's trying to. Again, they're in this space of constantly straddling these two worlds, creating, and it obviously gets more complicated as we start to go into the Axis Union, and how people could consider themselves later on British, and that it's an amalgamation of 4 nations effectively, but we're all speaking one language. Our courts in London, when you actually whittle it down, how much of that is actually the 4 nations and what, or just England. So it's a continuing shift of this waxing and waning of, and our political elites trying to sort of straddle that sort of boundary between, because normally it's all because the people they're lording over, most of them are from a different societal group than them. So they're having to play this game of, appeal to the nobility who make up the small percentage and maybe lean towards a specific group outside of the natural area, whether it be French, Scottish, Irish, and the having to appeal to the peasants or the I can't remember the Rome plebs. That's the word I was originally looking for. The plebs.
Okay, so is there any other comments that you guys want to go over before we finish up today's waffle? Well, live stream anyway, about who are the
I'm fine to
Anglo-Irish.
finish up. It's
Happy days.
midnight, so.
Oh, well, yeah. Time for
There
the
you
Irish
go.
to go to bed. Okay, right, lads. We have to be saying goodbye, good night to most of you lads, because I'm keeping a whole load of you lads up tonight. Michal, anything else you want to say?
We'll turn into pumpkins in a minute.
Michal, anything else you want to elaborate before I finish up there?
Yeah, first I'll just say.
By the way, comment section, if you want to say something, say it quick there. I see comment section saying, wait, I haven't done my comment yet. Go on anyway, Michal, what you need to say.
Yeah, no, someone was just saying Cromwell's name was actually, paternal name was William. Yes, he took the Cromwell surname from his maternal, I think it was his maternal uncle, his mother's side, who was the Duke or Earl of Hereford or something. He was a to-do family, but he was raised under him, so he took his name. They were the Williams family. I'll just say thank you to Wayne Callahan for the gifted sub on YouTube. That's it really.
Happy days. Okay, guys, we are going to be back next week again. Owen, Michal, do you want to meet up at 9 o'clock Irish time or 10 o'clock Irish time for next week? Because I can adjust it there on the live stream if you guys want to.
9 is fine for me.
9 o'clock, okay. Well, I'll change it there over to 9 o'clock. So I'll see you guys again next week at 9 o'clock. The topic for next week is going to be late medieval Gaelic Munster. I think what we'll end up having is Michal starting off the conversation by covering the various families and stuff, and then Owen O'Neill is going to cover all the gaps that Ulster man is going to leave out, because Michal, he's from Ulster. He's going to leave out a whole load of gaps, but thankfully we have Dr. Owen O'Neill who lives in Munster, so he's going to be able to fill in all the gaps that Michal leaves out. So
all the boring stuff.
So if you have any family or clan links to Munster, please come next week. I don't want to hear about like 3 weeks time where you guys are asking, you never covered Munster. We are covering Munster. We're covering next week. So we're going to go into the detail of all those clans and families in late medieval, and the politics as well of late medieval Gaelic Munster. So we're going to focus on the likes of the O'Briens and the McCartys and all those Gaelic families in between. And we're going to cover a little bit on the Desmond Fitzgeralds, because as we said today, there's a blur there between them. And we might cover a bit on the Scottish families as well that immigrate into that area, the McSweeneys, so on and so forth. So we'll talk about all that next week. Anyway, guys, also on top of that as well, if you want to support my channel, head on over to my Patreon. Just click on the link, my page, go inside there. Straight away, you'll see the Patreon. If you just want to give £2, that's fair enough to me. However, I do also do classes every single Sunday night over on Patreon. £20 a month. I cover classes this month and pretty much for this entire year up to June. We're going to be covering Ireland in the High Middle Ages. That's covering King John in Ireland, all the fighting between the English and the Irish, and also finishing up with the Scottish War of Independence. So I'm covering a whole load of classes that are absolutely amazing. So definitely head on over to my Patreon if you want to be a part of all that. Also, on top of that, Micheál, if somebody wants to support your channel, Clans and Dynasties, where you talk about the various families of Ireland and Scotland, how can they support your channel, Micheál?
Just become a member on TikTok or YouTube, where I do tomorrow. I'll be doing my members only live, or super fan, I think it's called on TikTok. There's varying degrees of support whenever you click there. And IRP is backed by doing a members only live on Thursday. This week we are doing the mythical origins of surnames, and how these stories sort of came up. Some of these stories came about. So some interesting families come up, but yeah, just become a member. It's the best way. I don't really have a Patreon. I have one, but I wouldn't advise subscribing to it because I don't have any links to it or anything.
Oh no!
I get the money. I just don't get notifications or nothing. So I wouldn't be able to thank you. So if you become a member, I can at least thank you and sure you can come across these lives and show the support. And Kevin's asked a question there, and ask that question again on another video, and I'll reply to it.
Happy days.
But that's it, yeah.
Dr. Owen O'Neill, are you live streaming tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Oh yeah, I have to do my job. What am I again?
I have too many jobs. I like once a week I'm doing questions and answers about Irish history live streaming. Due to my daughter's football, it's been on Tuesday the last few times, so it'll be tomorrow at 7. I released a video last week on the Irish famine. If you all want to watch that, I need some views because the algorithm didn't like it.
It's gone very bad.
People liked the video. They watched it for ages, but it didn't show it to many people, so I was a bit annoyed about that. And then I have a buy me a coffee account, and next year I will get either a Patreon or membership. I'm a bit slow.
Yeah, Dr. Owen O'Neill, you've got so much to share. You need to, get up with the rest of us. But anyway, regardless, that's all for me. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to be back on in the next hour. I'm going live again in the next hour because I'm going to be playing Kingdom Come. The Teutonic Knights have arrived in that video game. So definitely hunt on over. We'll have a deep conversation on what we talked about earlier tonight. And so any questions we haven't covered tonight, I'll cover in the next hour or so.
Just before we go, I'm answering someone's question. My daughter does soccer and football and rugby.
Jesus.
Down here in Kerry, football is football and soccer is soccer. And we'll talk more about it next time. Google it.
Happy days. Anyway, I'll be back on in the next hour playing Kingdom Come Deliverance, where I'll be answering any questions we didn't get to cover tonight, and also we'll be talking about the Teutonic Order inside of Bohemia in modern-day Czech Republic. So other than that, guys, thank you so much, and Slán go bhaile.